a small, okay, little mini documentary about share screens. AGT, World of Dance, yeah, both reality shows that have done a lot of breaking. So here in the background, I'm showing you some of the Rocksteady Crews video. And Rocksteady Crew is considered one of the most famous crews of breakdancers. So this is before there was such a thing as reality TV, and also before there was such a thing as, I'm trying to think about this technically, video had just started. And what I mean by video is that movies up until some point in the 80s were made like an old school camera, which is to say that you had to take your camera and it recorded onto film, and then you take your film in and have it developed. And so you had like this film on a reel or in a tape that had to be developed. And video, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but video means that once you record it on the camera, it goes onto the tape and you can already play it back. And that is one of the ways in which technology really changed visuality, or the visibility, I should say, of groups of community dancers, etc. Because before you could make your own video, when you had to get it developed and you had to get it cut by professional people, then people just couldn't see you unless they saw you live for the most part, right? So video really changed just as much as the internet changed the visibility of groups. So the Rocksteady Crew was a group of performing artists who came together for battles in their neighborhood, and they would perform mostly just socially, right? In the 70s and 80s, you have the beginning of breaking in the neighborhood of the Bronx, which would be that you'd have a party, there would be a DJ, and they would be DJing from actual records, and they'd have two turntables, and so they would scratch and pause and remix the music by adjusting the speed of the turntables or using their hands to manually change the beats. And when there was just a beat playing or even a pause in the beat before the rest of the music started back up, that was a break in the music. And by playing with the rhythm in that way, it makes for really interesting opportunities to dance. And so people would start to sort of spread out in that cipher shape, and really good dancers would start to dance, and they began to dance even on the floor. So it could be in the middle of the dance floor, could be putting some cardboard down on the sidewalk so that you can slip around and do the head spins. That's where the movement that's called breaking began. And it is mostly thought of as coming from the East Coast because of groups like these that came from the Bronx. And the Rocksteady Crew is considered the one that became the most famous, right? So they have actual like music videos, and they started to do some songs that they recorded to go with their dancing, which is mostly like this, mostly that there's a beat and then they're kind of talking over the top of it, but mostly the focus is the dancing, yeah? And they ended up touring all around the world, spreading the love of breaking, and we're generally really well admired, and there's not really anything negative to say about them, which is pretty fantastic. Most of them in the long run didn't make money off of this. I think there's a New York Times article I have here that's about how Crazy Legs is the only person who's left and still performing, and he is kind of upholding the, I don't know, he's keeping the memory alive of breaking as something that you do in your community. So let's move on from here. And let's let Quickstep sort of give you a moment.
When I got into breaking, being that what I saw with tap, Lindy Hop, swing, jazz, I was like, that's not happening with breaking. This has got to remain raw. It's got to remain ours. Because, you know, we were learning lessons in Zulu Nation about how we function as a people, what is ours, and how things fell out of our hands and became commercial, became codified. Now, let's fast forward to the present. 40 years later, what's happening with breaking, like America's Best Dance Crew? In that small window, the first 3 or 4 breakers were winning. And after that, they were like, okay, no, we're gonna do this other versions of like hip hop studio dance, and they're gonna be winning. And then it became kind of a little bit quirky, commercial. And then the audience that was raw, that was watching it, then turned away. There's a parallel that's happening now. We're still very young in the game when it comes to culture, only 40 years young. Super young compared to anything else that's been around for 500 years, 600 years. So I can imagine what was happening in ballet in the beginning and the struggles it was going through. Who made up what, where was it made up, what town? We're going through that. We're still defining it ourselves.
So I wanted to take a moment there to kind of tie those two things together, right? We're going to talk today a lot about like, how does a dance get seen and what does that commercialism do to selling things out? So you mentioned today, you guys, that most of you have only seen breaking on dance competition shows, basically. So like on the TV. And some of you have seen it in high school. But when we think about other forms of dance, and he was mentioning ballet as something that's been around for 500 years, you can see them in a lot broader variety of places, sort of because of the way that we've set up how we teach dance in the ballet form and how we show it. So breaking is still really at its core a community dance, meaning that it's taught between friends, and it happens like at school or in clubs or in nightclubs or in social clubs at school, but not so much taught in dance studios. So for example, when you go to a dance studio, there might be some breakers there, but they're probably participating in the format of studio hip hop. So studio hip hop would be like, a lot of you guys share videos in our discussions now there that are, like it's at the end of the class and you can see the teacher of the class and the 2 or 3 best students running the combination that they learned that day, and like maybe with a little improv before or after, and maybe you'll even see some break moves. But then the next group shows, they demonstrate the combination being that like 30 seconds of dancing that the people learned that day. And that format often is catered to not breaking, but hip hop or heels or whacking or animation style, or it's basically like the styles that are used in competition hip hop dancing. And if I haven't said this already before, competition hip hop dancing is taught in studios, and it's judged in competitions based on the synchronicity of your groups, the formation changes that you have of your groups, and the number of styles that you display in the piece that you're bringing, right? So you might come on, if you think about Jabberwocky, that is a competition style based performance group. So they're going to come on and they're going to do a section of tutting, and they're going to do a section of whacking. I'm just giving this as a made up example. And then they're going to do a section that maybe is crumping, right? So because that's how those competitions are judged, that's how competition hip hop looks, right? It might have all started with the dances that people were doing on the street, but because the groups are coming together and practicing in order to win these competitions, then it changes the way that the dance actually works. So the same thing is true of breaking, right? So breaking on the street, we just looked at some East Coast examples. And I showed you stormy weather in order to, where is that? Sorry, I thought I pulled up one more visual. Is true. I want to find you the video of well, let me ask you a question while I'm looking for this, because I'm gonna find you a West Coast breaking video next. But can you answer me this following question, which is, when we think about how we are being an audience, when you see something that is really exciting and new and unique, and we're trying to admire someone. Remember last week we mentioned a little bit about that feeling of like being starstruck by something that's really incredible, like seeing, somebody said they saw Mariah Carey like hit those high notes in live. So if we're talking about maybe seeing a break dancer like do a ton of head spins and then like backflip back up to standing and then fall down into the splits, how do we see that person as amazing and still as a human being? And have you had an experience like that where maybe even you knew someone casually and then you saw something they were talented at? Maybe it was dance, maybe it was singing, maybe it was acting, maybe it was, I don't know what else, skateboarding. But it sort of changed the way that you felt able to relate to them. Have any of you guys had an experience like that you'd be willing to share? There's no wrong answers here. I'm just kind of hoping that you can connect to this idea. Type it into the chat. Have you seen someone perform in a way that made you feel distant? Okay, I'm going to let you guys think about that question. I'm going to find my video that I'm looking for. Okay. Anybody? All right, here we go. We're gonna watch this history of breaking video real quick here.
There's this scene in the movie Flashdance where some b-boys are top rocking, busting out backspins, freezes, and a move that would later be called the moonwalk. But they aren't just some random kids. They're members of the Rocksteady crew, one of the most influential crews that brought Hollywood fame to breaking. Many people recognize the term breakdancing, a name coined by the media in the 80s, but the pioneers and practitioners of the dance form call it b-boying or breaking. The name breaking is broadly believed to have come from DJ Kool Herc in the Bronx in New York City. When hosting block parties in the 70s, he started isolating the beats to create breaks in the song.
It just refers to a moment in the song where you build tension by having the instruments drop out and just having percussion or percussion in the bass, basically the rhythm section. A scholar named Barbara Browning had this great way to describe it where she says, you feel impelled to fill the silence with motion. The break is a part of a lot of African-American and Afro-Caribbean music, especially Latino music, which is a big part of the roots of this dance, Puerto Rican and Cuban music in particular.
Traditionally, b-boys and b-girls dance to a mix of funk, jazz, techno, rock, and disco.
The sound of the music is very aggressive and very percussive. It's a battle dance, so the music gets people in the mood to battle. You want to be able to really rock the beat. You want to be able to play with those rhythms and reflect them in your body.
Breaking is made up of 4 elements: top rock, down rock, power moves, and freezes. Top rock is the foot movement from a standing position. It's the first display of style and a warm-up for the acrobatics of down rock. Down rock is when breakers use their hands and feet on the floor. This is where they show off foot speed and control of their footwork. From there, a b-boy can transition into power moves like the windmill and head spins. These moves need momentum and a ton of physical power. And the last element is a freeze. When a B-girl stops dancing and holds a position that requires incredible balance. These elements often draw movements from disciplines like Kung Fu, tap dance, gymnastics, and capoeira. But there's more to it. When breaking first began, it was a way for disadvantaged kids in the Bronx to be recognized. It helped transform their street culture, where gang violence slowly made way for neighborhood crews that used dance to compete against each other. Now, with
I'm just going to pause for a second there and remind you that this was also true of dances on the West Coast. So here we're talking about breaking in the Bronx, changing the culture in essentially the Black ghettos of New York City. And on the West Coast, the same thing was happening, right? We had the LAPD, which has been historically violent to people of color since long before the 1950s. And you had basically deserts of like food deserts and poverty going on in places like Compton, where there was really nothing to do to break out of your poverty and make little money, but get involved with gangs or selling drugs. And so on the West Coast, things like clowning and crumping became the way for people to start breaking out of those options for teens, right? You still had all of this angst and anger, and you still had a desire to sort of take that anger and use it in a positive way. And clowning, which is the predecessor of crumping, would involve dance battles and also like support teaching young kids the dance moves so that they would have something else to do, because there was no, after school care or after school programs or even studio dance places for students to work on improving themselves without having to get involved with gang violence in order to make some money or move on.
Competitions being commercialized, breaking means something different for the newer generation of B-boys and B-girls.
Competitions with breaking for me is a huge asset. I started competing because the energy of a battle is like amazing. And plus there was money to win. I wanted to provide for my mom, and my family, and help them out, It's like a way for me to just prove myself and put myself out there and get better. I feel like I get better at competitions.
But there are those who believe that mainstream breaking has left some traditions behind.
A lot of people don't have that original style no more. The original B-boys would go to parties more. They would do more party rocking, and they would interact more, like on a personal level with the crowd, with the fly girls. The B-boys today, they just go to competitions. They don't necessarily dance in parties.
People are attracted to the acrobatic aspect of it. People are attracted to the flamboyant aspect of it. But bottom line is it's a dance, and all that the gymnastics and the acrobatics are all flavoring to add on top of the core, which is really dancing, which is rhythm and movement and self-expression.
Breaking in its original form is more than just the dance. It's a connection to your family and your friends, your neighborhood rivals, your community.
In hip hop culture, it's very important to be connected to the community because we come from these communities. If we can't even attempt to give back in some type of way, culturally, financially, economically, spiritually, philosophically, I feel we fall short.
A lot of hip hop dance and hip hop in general is about getting people to notice you. And I think that's a personal thing for each individual person, but it's also a political statement. All of that stuff is embedded in the dance, just to say, not only am I important as an individual, but my community is important. And the concerns of my community are important. And the perspective, the point of view of my community is important.
You guys have any thoughts about that? Was there, what did you hear in that last video that was new to you or that maybe hits home for you? Do you have an experience about creating dance that makes you feel a sense of community? Yeah, Abraham, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The importance of community is something that you never considered. And I think that right there is the essence of what I'm talking about in terms of this double-edged sword of fame. When we talk about, well, let's talk next about how making a dance for public consumption changes the dance itself. But I've been asking you guys, like, have you ever experienced that sort of being starstruck or seeing someone's talent makes you feel a little bit of distance from people? We talked last week about the way that an audience from outside the community might watch a dance and be like, whoa, those people are so strong and so incredible and so hardcore, and I want to watch them performing breakdance. That doesn't really quite mean that I want to like go hang out with them personally, right? And sad but true. And so that's the audience from outside the community looking at a really strong and fierce and vibrant form of dancing. And that even though that community is performing because they want to be seen, they want to have a voice for their community, they want to express for their community, there can still sometimes be that gap. And that gap is what we're calling exoticism in this class. Yeah. But it can also happen on the inside. So when you have a performer who grew up in your community, learned dancing with them, and then let's say he learned from, let's say Chief 659, the guy that was talking about giving back to your community. But maybe he grows up to be really, really good and he has an opportunity to go on a reality TV show and ends up making it big and moves to Hollywood to be in dance videos or movies. And so the community now feels like he abandoned us. He's sold out. He's not representing us anymore because there's not so much of a connection. So let's talk a little bit about production. And I'm sorry, I did not find that video that I was looking for. So can I find it? It would be so great if it just showed up. I saw it in my video earlier today, so maybe I should watch the older video that we had up. I think I'm going to do it that way. Yes. Okay. So as weird as it is, we're going to watch my previous lecture for a second here. So I can find the video for you. That clothing company might do the clothing. And so all of those elements, including Nick, maybe not on double speed. Normal. Okay. Breaking 2, electric boogaloo, 1 of 9. There it is. Breaking. Okay. So I wanted to show you this clip.
Hey, tell you, once you come this way, we're gonna take you to the place where we all say, we're gonna take you to the place where we all go, and we call this place the miracle, where my mellow ozone and turbo deep there and combination the can't beat. So come on, everybody, come along with the TKO crew, cause you know what to do. We're gonna all take a walk on the avenue.
Proto-tutting. Okay, so we're gonna watch this in the background here. And this is shot in California. I believe it's Southern California, and it's electric boogaloo, right? Is it Southern California? I'm curious. Doesn't say here. So you have a bunch of the electric boogaloo dancers who were dancing in the late 70s, early 80s. And so this is sort of considered proto hip hop West Coast style, right? This is elements of electric boogaloo, and it's in a movie. So keep your eyes out on that cop there, because I want to sort of talk about the things like that happen when you make a dance in a big production, right? You have many camera angles here. So we know that this is a real production value scenario. And you'd assume that the famous original dancers and their neighborhood people are starring in this sort of a half documentary, half story sort of show, right? So I would assume that that guy breaking right there is one of the original dancers, and that at least most of the people standing around watching are community members. But when you get a big production company, they want to come in and make a film in the way that is the most profitable. So some of the ways that you make a filming production more profitable are that you film as quickly as possible, and that you can sell things while you're doing it. So if we take, for example, this scenario, in a real documentary, you would just come to the neighborhood and film whatever's going on. And you would have to put in hours and hours and hours of filming in order to find something that you can kind of cut together to make a music video. So for example, when we shot my dance company's music video, which was like 3.5 minutes long, we shot all day long, like 14-hour days for 3 days straight. Hours and hours of footage that you then cut down into 3 minutes, right? And so the same is going to be true here. The film company wants to be as quick as possible. So you do want to have the extras there that are the regular folks in the community, but you also need to make sure that you have people who can be there and be consistently there for all the shoots all 3 days. And so the film company might say, like, look, I'm going to bring in my extra dancers because I know I can count on them to like move quickly, get in place into the shot, and fill in the background and take instruction. And I don't have to worry about whether or not they're tired or volunteers or whatever. Another thing would be clothing. So it's totally possible that this dude chose his outfit out of his own wardrobe. It's equally possible that someone wanted to show off their costuming. So this could be a friend of theirs who wants to be a costumer, who wants to make outfits for other people, who maybe designed their clothes so that they would wear them and she could get some fame, or he could get some fame from doing that. It's also equally possible that the movie company decides we're going to use our costumers because we already have an agreement with Adidas that if we put some Adidas things in here, they're going to pay us for product placement, right? That's why when you watch TV shows, sometimes people will be like, here's my name brand soda in the background, because product placement is a form of advertising that movie companies do. And then the other thing is that you might, let's go back to the street dancing. Where's our dude breaking? You might have elements of people dancing in the street. Like obviously the mailman is not actually the mailman break dancing, but it looks great here in the film. But you would have people in this neighborhood, I'm sure, having breaking competitions in their neighborhood area, right? But then you can also see there's an example where the film company added in a person, right? So we have that cop lady. And they're like, oh, she'll be fine. She looks like she can do the electric boogaloo. Hey, dancer person, can you do the electric boogaloo? And she says, yes, I can. But then when you watch her dance, you're like, that doesn't look the same as everybody else's dancing. And I can guarantee you that this is a jazz dancer. So she was doing late 70s, early 80s jazz dance training that you would have trained in a dance studio where you also took ballet. And so all of these elements are not bad, but what I want you to see is that collectively, all those things together, like adding on wealthier shoes or costumes, adding in extra dancers who may or may not be authentic to the performance because it makes filming go more quickly, choosing to film in authentic or inauthentic places, right? We saw they went in the beginning to this is the stage where they had clearly, like, their community's been hanging out and doing dance performances, right? It's plywood nailed up together and spray painted in a hazy thing, but they're going to this new performance venue that's probably provided by I'm trying to figure out where that actress is from, right? She's not an authentic dancer from the hood. She's an actress that they hired, right? So all of those things basically just maybe just slightly, but a lot together, change the impression of what this community is really like in real life. And then when the movie company decides that 1 or 2 people out of here are a star, you've just seen like 60 people from this community collaborating on making this section from the movie, but only 2 of these people are going to get hired possibly for other jobs. And when we're talking about other jobs in Hollywood, a lot of the time you go to Hollywood, you're working other jobs and you're auditioning all the time. All the time that you spend auditioning is unpaid work. If you're a dancer, you need to be taking dance classes in order to keep your game up. So if you're a break dancer, maybe you can like find a community and dance outside and not have to pay for that. If you're a jazz or a tap or a ballet dancer, you have to pay for classes, which nowadays the going rate for a drop-in class is $16 to $25 for like an hour and a half of your time. So auditions sometimes can help cover that base, right? Keep you practicing. But when you get a job as an extra, you may or may not get paid. In New York City and in LA as well, but sort of further on, because New York City has all of those Broadway shows going on. There's 2 different kinds of unions that you eventually want to join. And in order to join a union, you need to get a certain number of union jobs and work a certain number of union hours before you officially become part of the union. And then once you become part of one union, you can't work for another union. So does that give you a little bit of a burgeoning sense of how exclusive it is to get jobs and work your way up? But for the most part, when you're doing a dance performance as a dancer on a music video, unless it is someone who is a really huge star or who already has a record deal and the record company already has a filming production company that lives, right? And then they just pluck up talent and sort of plug it into their filming company. Most people in music videos are not getting paid. I'm sorry to break your heart about this. And so how could a performer who moved across the country, let's say they came from the Bronx, they were raised up and taught to dance in the Bronx, and LA said, oh, we have a job for you. So they move all the way across the country by themselves, and they're just starting to get work for the first 3 or 4 years, even if they became Beyonce. Do you think it's likely that they have very much money to send home? No. I wish they did. And you can't, I'm not saying that you can't make money performing, you can. But a lot of the time, the money to be had is, as I said, with a huge production company. So whether you're working for Warner Brothers and you are dancing at an amusement park or on a cruise ship or in a Broadway play, or maybe you like are a staff backup dancer for a music company. All of those scenarios involve the music company having the control and the power to make sure that they're making their money, right? So I like to use this example from a couple of years ago of there's a Katy Perry song. I should save this. I should post this. But they were talking about a Katy Perry song where they had, I think it was Snoop Dogg who broke in to the middle of the song and did his rap. And they were talking about the way that the money broke down for royalties and how there were like 5 different writers on the song, and how the writers' royalties are broken down in percentages according to how many of the words or the percentage of the words that they wrote for the song. And so Katy Perry is listed as a writer, and the words accorded to her and her percentage of the royalty were for like 3 words, which were like, hey, yeah, and ooh, ooh. And then there was like a flat rate for Snoop Dogg's performance of like $250,000 for 2 lines of rap. And then on top of the royalties that he would earn from plays of the song. And then there's also the cost that the record company puts out in the first place to push the song out on radio and television, meaning that the record company is paying Clear Channel or whomever to play the song, or, you know, it used to be MTV. In the time of breakdancing and hip hop's beginnings in America, it was certainly MTV. So record companies would pay or cushion MTV to get them to play the songs that they want to be pop hits. And that's the way that the music industry works. So there is very little money for talent. And if you're a musician, like a pop star, for example, like, let's talk about Madonna as an example, right? Because everybody knows Madonna. For Madonna, she was just a person in New York City. She had a really huge coming out album. You have to have like 3 triple platinum albums in the 1980s before you actually took money home yourself, because it costs that much money to push the advertising for a pop star. So really, if you think about the term one hit wonder, all of that can be also true of a dancer, especially if the dancer is not a triple threat. And a triple threat means someone who can sing and dance and on Broadway act also, right? So when you think about what Lady Gaga or Kylie Minogue or Ariana Grande, all of those dancers have to be able to do both things. If you think about Miley Cyrus, she started as an actor, singer, dancer, because the more things you can do, the more formats you can star in. If you can do musicals on Disney, a lot of those musicals on Disney stars who are now pop stars, like, started out auditioning to be on Disney TV shows, but they might have also been people who are performing at the amusement parks. So the industry and fame itself, all of those occasions that we just talked about, amusement parks, TV shows, music videos, pop star concert performances, all of those things are designed to sell by enormous production companies. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more grounded for other populations. So in the case of Michael Jackson, he started out working with his family, and his family were already touring, singing and dancing, performing artists on essentially the Chitlin circuit that we had left over from the times in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The Jackson 5 and their families' tours, they were working mostly during Motown era. So definitely singing, some dancing on the dance floor, and the choreography being very small, but group choreography. And what happened when MJ came out of that scene and onto the big scene is that the record company and his family worked together with production company staff who knew the national audience and national sales. And so they trained Michael not only to, like, his dancing came from him watching all the other performers on the circuit, including James Brown. He would like sit off stage from James Brown and watch him perform. He learned those dance moves from other, including the moonwalk, which has been around since before 1954. He watched other performers to learn those dance moves. So they are community-based learning experiences. But when he became an international pop star, or a national pop star, as opposed to like regionally famous around the United States, they started training him to change his posture to look more, quote unquote, formal or elegant, right? He was also a huge fan of Fred Astaire. And so his movements are not only as grounded and strong as James Brown's pop star movements, but also very upright and sliding and flowy like Fred Astaire. So in a way, he definitely did make the change to become different from his home community in order to really become super duper famous. So does that sort of make sense how becoming famous estranges you in two directions? Like, a really famous person such as MJ, is different from where they came from. And no matter how many elements the white America, for example, may love that MJ could perform, he's still also, just by his being so talented, othered in a certain way. Does that make sense to you guys? Do you have questions about that? Because you can definitely disagree with me or say, like, I don't get it. And I would love to. Okay, cool. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Great. Did you guys have any, do you know, did me explaining sort of how music and production companies work sort of clarify or enlighten anything about how you imagine becoming a star works? Any other questions there? And I'm going to pop back to my notes and then check back in. Okay. I'm going to give you a little screen share for a hot second here and bring you over to my notes page. Okay, so we were watching breaking today. So we talked a little bit about the roots of East Coast breaking, right? Top rocking is when you're standing and you're doing that footwork. It's sort of a warm up to the down rock, which would be the work that's on the floor. So like the 12-step, the crab walk, anything that's like crawling or flipping over on the ground. Power moves are things like the windmills and the head spins and the coffee grinders. And then freezes are when you're freezing in a balanced pose, usually on an arm balance. And then the West Coast elements that we saw today were popping and locking, which are elements both related to electric boogaloo. Locking is like, it started out as the robot and it has evolved into animation style and tutting. And well, I guess you could also argue that popping and locking together sort of moved into those two categories. And also then later in our West Coast elements, we have clowning, which was definitely like you were dressed like a clown and using your hip hop dance moves in dance battles. And then it became crumping, which is perceivable as even more athletic and fierce and warrior-like. Yeah. Right. Okay, so let's talk about the aesthetic of cool. So you guys have an article this week. Boop, 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 boop. Right here are your videos for this week and your article. Yeah. So this introduction that I wrote here is sort of to lead you into the article that you're about to leave, because they're challenging articles. It's not like, hey, let's watch this dance. It's a theoretical academic article. And this one is written in the 1970s, and it's about African art, which has become famous again and again in different eras. Pardon me, especially in the 1920s. So we're going to come back to this idea when we talk about 1920s and swing dancing coming up soon. But in the 1920s, one of the things that proto-modernists who also were into it in the 50s and people breaking away from the like restraint of the Victorian era loved about African art was sort of this energy and this bravery to be independent. So Thompson's article invents this term called the aesthetic of cool. And next week, we're going to read about quote unquote Africanist elements in dance. So Thompson invented the aesthetic of cool as a term. And then Brenda Dixon Gottschalk, who is a dance historian and writer, takes the idea of the aesthetic of cool and adds in some more elements to make 5 elements that we can recognize in dance, so that even if it doesn't call itself Black dance, we can recognize those influences. So starting with the aesthetic of cool, we want to think about Thompson is making up this term in reference to art and how we can see in, hold on, let me give you some pretty pictures while we talk. How we can see in African art, especially statuary, which has lots of facial expressions, the African valuation of water, coolness, fluidity, and that those things are seen as embodiments and symbols of strength. And I think we take that for granted right now in our day and age in America. Right? Cool. We've been saying cool for decades, if not more. And but that does not come from white Eurocentric culture. So coldness, restraint, synchronicity, falling in line and being able to be powerful through, I don't want to just say unity because there's unity in both cultures, but by being exactly the same cog in a system is valued in white Eurocentric culture. So I have this image here to remind you of, this is the Buckingham Palace change of the guard, right? So they step in Europe, the military steps exactly the same across the land. They move their rifles in synchronicity, and it is you could easily call it a dance when they do these movements together, right? But in contrast, if we look at the Zulu and Lambu dances that we did look at before, you can see that these are also military warriors who are demonstrating their communal strength, but they're not trying to be perfectly in sync. Asterisk here, that would be a difference between like grassroots hip hop and breaking performances versus studio hip hop dance. Remember how we were talking about how you get scored on synchronicity and perfection as opposed to the strength of the individual members. But we also see, I know it's hard to see anybody's faces in these things, but look at this guy. Can I zoom in here? Let's see if I can zoom in for you. View. Zoom. 200? 500? Watch out, world. Here we go. Okay. So check this dude's face out. He is in charge of probably 60 men behind him who are all military men who he has supposedly perfect control over. And they are a military body. They're in this case, they're playing a band, but they are doing a performance that is designed to demonstrate power. We could take you over. We are a colonial power, right? Is his face excited in any way? No, it is stone cold. And that is sort of the euphemism that we want to talk about here, right? It's not cool, it's stone cold. And when you think about, you know nothing, Jon Snow, or the way that strong, even rebel male characters are presented in media these days, especially white ones, I should say, that the idea that they don't show emotions, that boys don't cry, that that a troublemaker can be sent off to military school to quote unquote get in line, all of those are examples of the way that white Eurocentric culture values, oh, what is the word I'm looking for here? It's going to be like, I'm trying to think of the specific word that relates to, for example, the word's going to come to me if I talk my way around it here. When you think about the way that Native Americans, after they had been pushed off the land we stole from them and put into reservations, were then told that they needed to come to either boarding schools or regular schools and assimilate. There's the word. So assimilation is valued. Not showing your own emotions is valued. Making yourself the same as everybody else so that we quote unquote can all move together with force and power. That is sort of the white Eurocentric version of coldness. In contrast, the African value of strength and coolness relates to letting all of that emotional chaos, complication, individuality remain and not being bothered by it, right? So coolness doesn't mean that you have a heart of stone and you don't care because you are falling in line to do the right thing. Coolness can mean that you are okay with chaos because you ride above it like a boat on water. So hopefully that is a little, does that start to make sense about the difference between ice cold and the African aesthetic of coolness? And this picture I have here is actually President Jacob Zuma attends an Inlamu dance event in Kandla. So I have this, it looks like a dance party, right? And they're just totally dancing their buns off, to put it politely, right? And you have the president like falling over almost onto his butt, maybe, because like, look at the dirt kicked up because he's dancing so hard. And the acceptance of this display of power just wouldn't happen at Buckingham Palace, right? King Charles is not going to dance so hard that he falls on his butt in public and then be absolutely celebrated by his people, because that is just a different set of aesthetic values. And that comes through in dance and it comes through in art. But we love that sense. And oftentimes, this photo here comes actually from the book that the African Aesthetic of Cool article comes from. And it's demonstrating this woman who is of great standing in her community, and she's dancing. And this is sort of the female example of coolness, is that you might have a woman dancing on the dance floor and even maybe dancing and flirting and courting with another man, but her facial expression in this aesthetic of coolness is very calm and even perhaps disdainful, even though she might be totally flirting or even twerking with her dance partner. And that would be an example of her expressing coolness, like, I'm too cool for you. You can court me, but I'm going to say no. That whole idea is an aesthetic that we value and that we will see in dance and art. Yeah. So let's scan up and make sure that we covered our funness. Yep. Rock steady, breaking, middle passage. All right, guys. I think that covers today. Do you guys have any questions, clarifications, examples, thoughts that you want to throw out here in our last 5 minutes? Turn off the spotlight. Anything else you want to throw out? Okie dokie. So for next week, we will be this was 5B. So we're going to close up 4B. And we have this is our discussion materials. There's some extra links in here to the things that we looked at today. Yeah. Hooray. Looks like I should probably check some of those links. And then next week we'll start on our last section about exoticism, and we're going to talk about Africanist elements, the Brenda Dixon Gottschalk idea. So we're going to start with that reading, and then we're going to start looking at social dances and the ragtime to swing era. So we're going to talk about like the Roaring 20s and swing dancing and Lindy Hoppers, flipping in social dancing. And we'll have a quiz this week and next week. And then we have anything else going on? No, just another quiz. So we're in the sort of slow section here. Yay. And then after next week, we'll start the economy section. We'll talk about minstrelsy and tap for a few weeks. Yeah. And then we'll get to the 50s after that. We'll start talking about how to have changed, right? So right now we're talking about how money sort of divides communities and gives them strength. And then we're going to talk about that happening in the 20s next time. So we'll watch 20s dancing, and then we'll move on from there. Sound good? Any questions? I have not graded your try it yourself videos yet, but I hope you guys are all supporting each other. And remember, you can get more points by supporting each other extra. So don't be shy about going back into the try it yourself discussions and just like giving feedback to other people, and hopefully supportive and positive feedback, because nobody here is trying to be a professional dancer. Well, maybe there are somebody. Maybe we're going to find out that there's a professional dancer in our class this semester, but mostly I want you to feel like you're trying something new. I know a few of you have sent me some emails saying that you feel anxious or nervous about sharing video, but this is an all beginner scenario. So please don't be shy, because I want you to feel like you can expect everybody to support your efforts. Yeah. Okay, guys, that is it for today.